Hey everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to other people about their stories with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or VEDS, which I also have, and I think everybody who listens to the show knows that I also have that. So welcome back and Happy New Year. As part of the new year and trying to do things that maybe are a little bit different for me, a few of my friends have suggested multiple times that I tell my story on this podcast, and every time that I have done that, I have they have done that, I have responded with, no, this podcast is for other people to tell their stories, and my YouTube channel is where I tell my story. But I decided to do that, and so my friend Becca is here, and she's offered to talk to me about my story with VEDS, and so she's going to take over.
Hi, I'm Becca, and I'm going to be interviewing Katie. So, Katie, we have known each other for a while now.
Yep.
And we met 3 years ago? Summer of
2016.
And before I met you, I had heard about you from our group of friends. And the perception was that you were sick all the time.
Or injured.
Yeah. Or bruised or
something.
Usually an injury. But there was always something, especially your neck.
Yeah.
Because I remember that being talked about all the time. Like, even when you moved to Washington, that when we would Skype each other, sometimes you would have to lay down because you were in so much pain.
Yeah, I had like a heating pad, an ice pack I would rotate with, and I would move my computer around, and I would stand sometimes, I would sit sometimes. I was like constantly moving around.
Yeah.
Because we're nerds and we played D&D.
Uh-huh.
So I would Skype in for D&D from Washington to Florida.
Uh-huh.
And that was a real concern. Sometimes I would be in too much pain.
Yeah. And we would always ask you how you were feeling today, if you were up for it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we didn't know, and you didn't know. I think you had an idea. When did you think that you had VEDS?
That's a complicated question. So I thought I had VEDS a couple of different times. The first time was in, I think it was 2013 or it was 2014. Okay. So in 2012, I had this weird thing on my arm called elastosis perforans serpeginosa.
And what's that?
That is a rare skin disorder where your body basically pushes out the elastic fibers from underneath your skin out of the skin, and it basically looks like ringworm or some kind of like your face right now is great. It just looks like ringworm, and I had been struggling with it for a year and a half prior to that. And I thought it was ringworm. So it was like a year of ringworm treatments.
Like antifungal creams?
Right. Antifungal creams, prescription strength antifungal creams. Doctor, please help me get this ringworm off my arm because my girlfriend does not like it. And that was the biggest, it was on my arm, and I lived in Florida, and it was just out there all the time. And I couldn't stop myself from picking at it. I wanted it gone. Nothing would work. I tried cutting it off. I tried wart remover acid multiple times. It was burned a lot, and it just kept coming back. And so finally I saw a dermatologist, and it took 2 different biopsies to figure out that it was something called elastosis perforans serpeginosa.
And how do you spell that? I'm just kidding.
I can spell it for you, but I'm not going to. Because I don't think it's relevant. So when I got the diagnosis of that from the dermatologist, which is in 2013, I guess that would have been, 2013. He said that I should go see a geneticist because that's something that is sometimes seen with people with Down syndrome or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I knew I didn't have Down syndrome. I figured I would know by that age whether or not I had Down syndrome. So I looked into types of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I went home and I just Googled it. I'm like, well, I don't really fit the criteria for the hypermobile type or the classical type. But when I saw the vascular type, and this was several months after that appointment, because I was just I don't have time for this. I don't have any leave time. I don't have paid sick time. I'm not going up to the Mayo Clinic and doing this because everything's fine. So I saw the vascular type, and I noticed a lot of things that were similar to what I looked like.
Mm-hmm.
There was a thin translucent skin. There was acrogyria, which is aging of the hands, like premature aging of the hands, which is something I was made fun of for when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
There were almond-shaped eyes. My thin nose was on there, and I was like, wow, that's something that my mom has commented on my whole life. So maybe I should see a geneticist. I'm not going to panic, and I didn't really know the significance of it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really realize, like, artery ruptures and dissections and organ ruptures and shortened lifespan. Like, I hadn't really read too far into that. So I did get on a waiting list for geneticists, which I saw in 2014.
Okay.
And that geneticist, at that time, I talked to her about my concerns for the vascular type, and she told me that nobody has that type. You don't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And she did, like, a whole workup for, like, it's called a Baton scale, which is where your joint hypermobility is assessed.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't meet the criteria for any type of Ehlers-Danlos, she said.
Uh-huh.
So off on my merry way I went. So it wasn't until the beginning of 2017 that I figured it out that they had missed it.
Because you had moved
Yeah.
to Washington. And how did your move to Washington play into finally figuring out your diagnosis?
I don't think it really did. I think it made it harder in some ways because I had all new doctors that didn't know me and that didn't want to test me. So I had like spontaneous, back to that neck pain, like that spontaneous severe neck pain that would show up like super severe out of nowhere and then take months to resolve and then would happen again. And everybody was telling me to be more careful. So I'm like staying up all night, making sure I'm sleeping correctly in the right position. I've got the right pillow, like every hour I'm waking up to check and make sure that I'm still sleeping in the right position. Like just crazy things that I was experiencing. And it was kind of hard on myself too because like, what am I doing wrong? That whole time it's like, why can't I just do everything right? I exercise, I eat healthy. Why is this happening to me? And it was very, very frustrating. So at the beginning of 2017, it had happened again at the end of November. And I just started a new job. I was in the shower one morning and I reached for a shampoo bottle and it was so severe and it just kept getting worse. And I was like, well, I got to go to the doctor. And they didn't do anything. And they gave me some Tramadol, I think it was.
Tramadol's for what?
It's for pain.
Okay.
I think it's Tramadol. There's Tramadol and there's Toradol, and I always mix up the two. One of them is like a really high strength, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, like the same class of drugs as ibuprofen.
Okay.
And Aleve, which is
Okay.
naproxen. So really high strength of those.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a while, and I had figured it out sometime after that. It took a couple months. I was going to be getting an ultrasound for a workup for thoracic outlet syndrome, which is a compression of the nerves and sometimes the artery in like your brachial plexus, which is, it goes in between basically like your collarbone, like down here through your arm. And that's, everything kind of compresses for a minute so that it can move through that area. And so sometimes you get compression in there and it can cause like sudden pain through your arm, whichever arm is affected, and can cause neck pain too. So I was at lunch with my brother on a Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, and I told him I was going to go see a vascular surgeon, and he made a joke. He's like, they won't even have to do any tests because they can see all the veins in your body anyway. And it just stuck with me. That day. So when I went home, I'm like, why is it that you can see the veins in my entire body? And it's something I'd asked multiple times when I was a kid. I asked somebody if there was too much iron in my blood, like just weird.
Is my blood too strong?
Is my blood too strong? Like, why am I bruising? Like, why can you see my veins? And nobody knew the answer. And they're like, no, too much iron is not a thing. Like,
yeah.
Yes. I think that's exactly how that doctor responded.
No, it's not a thing.
It's not a thing. No, you don't have vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Nobody has that. It's not a thing. So that night, I figured it out. I basically sat down and went through my entire medical history again. Like I just, big picture. And that's something that I tend to do in general, is take a step back and look at the big picture of everything. And I was just, holy crap, I have this.
So that's when you were convinced.
That's when I was absolutely convinced, no doubt in my mind. The next morning when I went to work, I had a very, very hard time keeping it together because I knew in my heart that I had this thing.
Yeah.
And I had found the life-limiting parts of it at this point, and I knew the significance of it. And I didn't know if I was supposed to tell anybody or keep it to myself. But I fit every small criteria. There's like a minor diagnostic criteria list and like a bigger one. Major causes for concern and minor causes. Like maybe if you have a lot of the things on this list, you should look into this. And I had almost every single one on that. So I just knew.
And when was that?
That probably was February of 2017 or the end of January. And it took 3 months after that to get somebody to send me a genetic test. Because I had new doctors. I was in Washington, I had new doctors, and the new doctor that I was seeing was, I told him, I went to him, I said, hey, by the way, this minor thing that's going on, I think I have this crazy condition, and I need somebody to test me for it. But can you do a pap smear too?
And while you're at it, just do a pap smear.
It was just like, it was just another thing I bring to my doctor.
Yeah.
And he like looked at me. I remember him looking at me and being like, what? He's like, well, I've heard of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Like, let me look at your mobility. And I was like, okay, but I'm not that hypermobile everywhere. I really think it's the vascular type. And he actually knew what I was talking about.
That's good.
Which is so rare. And he's like, yeah, I definitely think you have concerns for this. And then strung me along for over a month as I tried to get him to send. All I needed him to do is take blood work and send it to the University of Washington. Because they have a lab that will accept the blood. Otherwise, I was on a waiting list for over a year to see the geneticist in Washington for this. And when you first realize that you have this, being on a waiting list for over a year when you're having all this pain and you don't know why you're suffering and you know that your life is limited and you know that nobody can help you and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing, is like, okay, great. Like, I might die today or end up in the hospital from sneezing too hard, but I won't get a true diagnosis for over a year.
Yeah.
Which means I'm walking around without a medical alert bracelet or without anybody knowing what I have or believing what I have for over a year. I can't do that.
Like a walking time bomb.
A walking time bomb that doesn't have a warning label.
Just looks like it's just like a magic 8 ball.
Yeah. It's like, what's the surprise? This thing might blow up.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like.
Yeah.
So I ordered my own medical alert bracelet and everything because I knew that I had it. And it just ended up having to call the geneticist back in Florida that told me I didn't have it and begging them to pull my file and look. And then they sent me a genetic test. We're like, you know what? We're gonna send you one. It's just a saliva kit. And after all of that, I just remember being so frustrated that it was just a saliva kit and nobody could just send me a spit tube. Like, what's the big deal? Just send me a spit tube. So I'm very pro genetic testing for vets, and I know that shows.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
It's important to know.
Yeah.
It's important to know if you have this so that you can adjust your lifestyle.
Right.
For that. Because I know that you've adjusted your lifestyle quite a bit.
A little bit, yeah. One of the crazy things is that some of the things that I'd always done popped up as just like things like
recommendations.
Yeah, it was like, for instance, I've had a phobia basically of pregnancy my entire life. I felt it was unnatural to have something growing in me. And I was like, I briefly thought about whether or not that means like I don't align with the gender that I am or something. But that really wasn't it. That really wasn't it at all. It just felt unnatural to have something growing in me. Like, it would be bad. And turns out it can be really bad. And they have recommendations for pregnancy with vets, and they don't want to tell you not to get pregnant. But there are some serious precautions that you have to take, and there are some serious risks that come along with being pregnant with VEDS.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you have uterus rupture and artery ruptures, and I'm sure that I think they do C-sections.
That would make sense.
Yeah, because they don't want you straining like that and putting that strain on your arteries. They think that the increased hormone levels can actually cause a higher amount of artery complications during the pregnancy, like just extra dissections and stuff like that.
It's an extra strain on your body.
Yeah. And I'm so small. I always avoided contact sports. I've never liked anything flying at my face. So anything that I just hated it. Mm-hmm. And so all of these things that were just normal for me to avoid were there. Mm-hmm. And that was really, really weird when I was diagnosed.
Yeah. And like, how has your diet changed? Because I know you're vegan now. Mm-hmm. And you were vegan before.
Yeah.
But in between there, I think you were trying some different things.
Yeah. So I was a vegan in high school and then a vegetarian for another few years after that. Mm-hmm. And when I was diagnosed with VEDS, I was reading about the bowel complications that come with it, which is your bowel ruptures and perforations, and how you should really avoid constipation. So let's go into poop.
Well, let's do it. Let's go into it.
Let's go into poop. So I was having a lot of problems with constipation, and I just remember stepping back and looking at the big picture and trying to remember a time when I didn't have any problems with constipation. And that was when I was a vegan. Mm-hmm. And so I just made a decision to try to figure out what food sensitivities I might have that might be contributing to constipation. Mm-hmm. So I just decided I'm going back to vegan. Mm-hmm. And I pooped great. It was great.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of stuck with that for the most part. I did briefly go off of it for a couple months. And
because I remember you were trying that high sodium.
That was... Oh, man, that was
What was that?
That was a result of my third TIA, or mini stroke, and the hospital thinking that maybe I just had what's called POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is something that a lot of people with Ehlers-Danlos, the hypermobile type or the classical type, I think, tend to have. Mm-hmm. And that's where you become tachycardic based.
What's tachycardic?
Tachycardic is like your heart rate going out of the normal range.
Okay. Like beating too fast?
Or just like beating too fast.
Weird.
I know. Yeah. I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay, so tachycardia?
So tachycardia is where it's a heart rate that's higher. I think it's higher than 100 beats per minute or 110 beats per minute resting, I think. Don't look at your watch.
So anyways,
back to the high sodium diet.
Yes, your high sodium diet.
So it's tachycardia that's like brought on by different, like your whole orthostatics, which is like your body managing your heart rate and everything. Mm-hmm. Your autonomic nervous system, I think, is really what it is.
What is autonomic?
I don't know how to define that.
That's fine. I'm just a layman trying to understand medical terms, because you know more medical terms than I think my stepmom, who's a nurse. And I'm not lying.
I think that's the right word for it. I think your autonomic nervous system is like your body's management of things like your blood pressure, your heart rate, like your normal things that you can't really control.
Like you can't control your heart beating.
Right. You can't be like, heart, I'm done with you today. Would you just stop?
Oh, yikes.
Not without any outside interference.
Yeah. You can't will that into existence.
Right. So that based on your posture. So a lot of people with POTS, when they first, like mornings tend to be really difficult for them, because when they first stand up in the morning, they'll pass out. That's a common feature, is that like your heart rate will go out of control, your blood pressure might drop, and you pass out. And it's a real struggle for people with POTS. And there's a lot of other things that come along with POTS, I think, like brain fog and fatigue and just an overall crappy feeling. Mm-hmm. So after my third mini stroke, they're like, well, maybe you have dysautonomia, which is, dysautonomia is a blanket term for your autonomic nervous system not functioning properly, and POTS is something that falls underneath that umbrella as one of the ways that is dysautonomic.
Is that also why you wore the compression socks?
That is also why I wore the compression socks, because the thought was that if I wore the compression socks, it would help my body from having blood pool in my legs and keep my blood pressure high enough. So all that high salt diet and the compression socks are two major recommendations for people with POTS because it raises your blood pressure. There's also some talk about whether or not like your electrolytes are really balanced if you have POTS. Like you can't get enough sodium, and so a lot of people benefit from high sodium diets when they have POTS. So and that was a real struggle. That was really, really terrible. And I kind of came to the realization myself that I don't have that.
Just like you came to the realization that you have VEDS.
Right. Just like I came to the realization I have VEDS, just like my skin cancer. It was just...
skin cancer?
I had skin cancer in 2017, too.
What a year for you.
Yeah, I guess
Diagnosed
it was a year,
with VEDS, skin cancer. Is that the year you got your uterus out? No, that was this year. Last year.
Last year, and it was just the tubes. The uterus is still there.
Got it. Finger guns.
Yeah. But that's why I was on a high salt diet. So I got myself off of that, and I don't wear compression socks anymore because I never passed out. It was mini strokes.
just mini strokes.
Just mini strokes.
In the morning, yeah.
No big deal.
Did 4th of July, when you had the mini stroke in the afternoon, change your thought process on that? Because beforehand, all of your mini strokes were in the morning, correct?
All of my mini strokes were in the morning. July 4th was my 4th one. That was the 4th one that was consistent with this. We think I had another one in March of 2017. But it was a little bit different. The one in the afternoon, I think, was where I realized I needed to change my diet because I was trying that keto diet.
Yep.
And it was like a high-fat diet. And I had 3 mini strokes while I was on that diet, and that July 4th one was the 3rd one. And everybody was telling me, no, it's not your diet, it's not your diet. But I was like, I can't take a big step back at this and look at this picture and believe you that this doesn't have a factor. Because I had 1 in December, and then I didn't have any until I switched my diet to keto. And then I had 3.
Yep.
So it was just one of the getting off of that and off of that high sodium diet, and the compression socks was just me being like, you guys are wrong.
As per usual.
And I am not going to limit my life like this anymore.
So you have done you've played around with a lot of different diets.
Yeah.
And you finally settled that vegan is the one that works for you.
Because it's poop.
Poop friendly.
Poop friendly. It's poop friendly for me.
Lots of greens and lots of regularity.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for. Because, okay, let's honestly get into poop. Because we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
How when you go to the bathroom, you sit there and you don't strain.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind. I'm not saying that I sit there and like blow blood vessels in my head. But I'm saying I don't think I've ever thought about it.
Yeah.
Like I just go to the bathroom and I do my business and I leave and wash my hands and I leave.
Yeah.
And I've never had to think about it, but I've always had fairly regular bowel movements. Like, but not like it just blows my mind. The not straining part, because you don't want to rupture anything.
Right. I don't want to rupture anything, and that's paramount. So I try not to strain. I think of it as like one of the recommendations that they have is, like no heavy weightlifting where you're straining like that, because that puts more pressure on your arteries and your vessels. And that same strain is also what comes into play like when you're in labor or when you're trying to go to the bathroom and you can't.
Yeah.
Like that kind of like bear down and push.
Yeah.
And I don't do that at all when I poop now. I just don't. If it doesn't want to come out, I'm like, well, it'll come out later when it's ready, or I'll take a laxative, or I mean, that's why I really try to just monitor it so I don't get constipated. But I'm only human, and I do cheat sometimes, and it results in problems. So then I have to do things like
milk magnesium.
Ugh, so gross.
So do you want to talk about that doctor visit?
Oh, the one where I had 10 days worth of backup?
Yeah, that one.
That was hysterical. So like for 3 months, I think, I was having this pain in the lower left part of my abdomen it felt like I was going to rupture. As every time it came up, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the time that I perforate my bowels. I just feel it. I know it. And then I would try to take a step back and be like, oh, I think you're probably overreacting, Katie. I think that's, calm yourself. It's probably something else like diverticulitis or diverticulosis. So diverticulosis is when you get like little pockets I think it's when you get little pockets that push out in your intestines. And then diverticulitis is when those get inflamed.
Oh, okay,
yeah. Or infected. So it's basically inflammation of those pockets. And so I was like, well, that would be more likely, right? Like maybe that's what it is. And that's not quite so severe. So after 3 months of like trying a probiotic, and I was pooping two or three times a day.
Which is a lot.
Just a lot. So I went to the doctor finally again, and I'm like, I really think we should get a scan of my intestines because I haven't had one, and I'm still having this pain, and it's been 3 months. Let's just make sure. So they called me after that scan. They did a CT of my intestines. And they called me and they said, well, the only thing it showed is that you're a bit constipated. I was like, how is that possible when I'm pooping 2 or 3 times a day and it's completely normal poop? There's nothing weird about this poop at all that says I'm constipated. She's like, okay, let me get back to you. Let me go talk to the doctor and I'll get back to you. So she called me back and she said there's 10 days worth of backup in there. I'm like, what?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that's why I'm so uncomfortable, is that there's 10 days worth of constipation in my bowels pushing on those intestinal walls. And every time I'm feeling that pain, it is because it's pushing on those intestinal walls, and my risk for a rupture is higher. And that blew my mind completely. So she suggested I go get one of those like cleansing, it's magnesium, some form of, it's not milk of magnesia.
Okay.
But it's magnesium citrate. And it's
that's
like this
it.
bubbly, gross, clear liquid that comes in all these different flavors.
Ooh, fun flavors.
Yeah, and they suggested I do it over the course of a day rather than all in one dose, and warned me that there would be a lot.
10 days worth.
10 days worth. And there was. And it was so terrible. But now I'm like, I keep some of that on hand for if I really, really need it.
And so, I mean, that just shows how in touch you are with your body. Like you have always been.
Yeah, so yeah.
Like, you're like feeling, and you're just like, I feel like I'm going to rupture, but like, no.
That can't be it.
No, that can't be it. It's got to be something else. And then you're like, no, that's what it is. And you're like, gosh dang it.
Yeah, that was really funny to me when that happened, because I remember calling my mom and telling her. It's just like, no one can tell you anything about your body that you don't already know. And I was just like,
It's true.
It's like somebody, I think around the same time, like I felt sick one morning, and it's because I had upped my dose of aspirin. I was taking it 2 times a day instead of 1, and I took one late at night because I forgot to take it with dinner. And I woke up the next morning, and I was just like, I felt really sick to my stomach, and I went to work, and I tried to manage it, but I felt like I was going to throw up, which is also something I avoid.
Yeah.
Like the plague.
Yeah.
So someone told me they thought I had just gotten too stressed out, and that's why I was throwing up. But really, it was that I knew it was my stomach being messed up because of the aspirin.
So with the straining, tell me about the gym, because you love to go to the gym.
I love to go to the gym.
So tell me how having VEDS changed your gym.
At first, it didn't at all. At first, when I got diagnosed, I kept going to the gym with the same kind of intensity that I always had. I was a little bit more careful with crunches
Mm-hmm.
and stuff, but I would still jog, I would still run, I would still do weightlifting without heavy weights. There were little things that I adjusted, but I think that the biggest change that I've experienced with exercise is that I used to really like exercising when nobody was around.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really nice gym in my apartment complex, and I would be the only person in there at 4:00 in the morning exercising. And that's where my perspective, I think, changed the biggest,
Mm-hmm.
was that my embarrassment about exercising around other people
Mm-hmm.
no longer outweighed the potential for an emergency
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to call 911.
Because I remember you used to like kayaking.
I
by
love
yourself.
kayaking.
Yeah.
And I've kind of put that on hold until we figure out why I'm having mini strokes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want to have one out in the water and then have a gator come and eat me.
Yeah. Florida waters, you know.
Florida waters. But I still enjoy that, and that's something that I still love.
Yeah.
So it's the not being around, like that gym in particular,
Mm-hmm.
at 4:00 in the morning by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had more incentive to go to a gym.
Yeah.
And at that time I didn't have an Apple Watch that could call 911 for me either.
Yeah. Would you recommend an Apple Watch for people with VEDS?
I think that
or
that's
some sort of service where they can call from their watch?
I think that has offered me a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
It wasn't something I thought a whole lot about until I had my first mini stroke
Mm-hmm.
and had to crawl, I think, 15 or 20 feet to get to the phone
Mm-hmm.
to call 911 while I was having a mini stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And after that one, it took 4 days for me to want to shower because I didn't want to get in the shower and have something that was like in my head. The shower was the one place in my apartment where I couldn't take my phone with me.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to have a stroke in the shower.
Yeah.
But my watch can go in the shower with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like very freeing
Mm-hmm.
to have that there. So I would recommend it.
Yeah.
And the new one has the fall detection feature, which luckily hasn't come into play for me, but
Yeah.
it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Call 911 for you if you fall.
Mm-hmm. So how has VEDS changed how you view being by yourself and being alone?
I've always really enjoyed being by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I love my me time. Probably more than anybody.
Yeah, because I know you love being by yourself. You
Yeah.
love having your alone time. You love being able to go and just do things by yourself.
Yeah.
So how has that changed? Because you can't go super far from a hospital.
I can. There's a risk involved.
Yeah.
I think that when I have a mini stroke, for a little while after that, I don't do it. Like, I just actively resist
Mm-hmm.
doing that,
Mm-hmm.
going off by myself. But long term, it hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
What the biggest struggle has been with wanting to be by myself and doing things by myself is not my fear about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's other people's fear about it. Because people who love me get worried
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want me to go off by myself and do things. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they want me to constantly be surrounded by people, and
Mm-hmm.
that comes into play like in almost every aspect of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody who really enjoys alone time, it's hard to have that sudden expectation that I'm never going to be alone again.
Mm-hmm.
And every time that I feel like when I decide to live with somebody as a roommate or something like that, I get very, very touchy about the comments that are made. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the assumption is that it's because I don't want to be alone, or that I shouldn't be alone, or that I can't be alone.
Yeah.
When really it's just because I want to save money. But if I had all the money in the world,
Yeah.
you bet I would still live by myself.
Yeah. Because you lived by yourself in Washington.
I did, and it was the best. I loved it.
Yes.
I love living by myself.
And after having your TIAs, Did you get a roommate?
I got a roommate to save money a
Okay.
few months after my first one.
Okay.
And it was legitimately
Just to save money.
just to save money.
Yeah.
And it was something that I could see that my mom was like suddenly relieved that I was going to have a roommate. And I was like, please stop.
Yeah.
Like, I love you, Mom.
Yeah.
Please stop. That's not why I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, when people make comments about it, it's so hard to just be like accepting of that's their perception of me is of somebody who can't be alone.
That's not who I am.
It's not who I am.
I've got my Apple Watch and my cell phone. I'm fine.
I got my Apple Watch. I've got all these redundancies set up.
And you have your little packet that
Yep.
you carry around with you.
I do.
What is that?
So that's the emergency booklet passport that is given to people who are diagnosed with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome by the University of Washington.
Okay.
There's a whole little packet for doctors that like has the major things to avoid if you present with an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
So it tells them the major complications that arise with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and what they should be looking out for. It tells them like, don't do an angiogram where you're going through blood vessels.
Mm-hmm.
Don't endoscopy and colonoscopy are strongly discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. It also has sections for me to list all my medications and my doctors and how many bowel ruptures I've had and when they are, how many dissections or aneurysms I have or had and where those are.
Mm-hmm.
Emergency contacts, like all of that
Mm-hmm.
is in this booklet. And you're supposed to, they recommend that you take it with you everywhere. And I do. So I fancied it up a little bit because it wasn't this like clear plastic thing that didn't look much like an emergency book, and it kept tearing.
Mm-hmm.
Like the laminate kept tearing.
Yeah.
And catching on my clothes, and so I finally went a couple months ago and I got a passport holder with some patches, like with the emergency medical symbol on it, and I glued those patches to both sides of it, and so now it really sticks out.
It does.
As an emergency book.
For sure.
It's like, okay, something is happening over there. I have this thing here that has an emergency medical symbol on it. I wonder what that is.
And you have your bracelets.
And I have my bracelets. So, in my mind, I have prepared as well as I can for any situation. And that has been the most freeing thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you're prepared for the things that you can control, and you accept what you can't control, then you can live your life fully. I can live my life fully. And I do. I live my life very fully. I'm like very happy.
The most busy, fastest moving person I've ever met in my life. You were literally everywhere at all times. I don't know how you do it. And it just blows my mind because you do everything. You do it all. You go for walks. You go to the gym. You go to hang out with your friends. You go to dinner. You do this. You I don't know. I don't know how you read YouTube, podcast. You read a book. You go to movies, and I'm just like
work full time.
And I'm just like, I also work full time, and I'm in school, but like also, I could never manage the schedule that you manage, and I don't know how you do it, but it's so impressive.
Thank you.
It really is. And it's really nice to hear that like having your watch and having your bracelets and having your emergency booklet, passport, and all of that stuff has allowed you the freedom to be you.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is the acceptance of the things that you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of risk that comes with just me being. Just sitting here.
Yeah.
I talked to somebody who was drinking a cup of tea and dissected an artery, and that's a real possibility.
Yeah.
So there are certain limitations that I will accept, like not straining really hard at the gym, but I'm not going to stop exercising or pooping. But I'm not going to stop exercising for fear of that happening.
For fear of limiting your life. Like you're so positive about everything, and you're very accepting of everything. Like, I feel like you've come to terms with it.
Yeah.
And you don't let that stop you. And because of that, you're just like, gung-ho! Like, full force ahead! Like, let's go!
Yeah. It's the hardest thing, I think, is managing other people's fear of it.
Mm-hmm.
When I had my first mini stroke and I was on the ground waiting for the fire department to come, it was like I called 911. I told them exactly where I was, what I needed,
Mm-hmm.
everything. And I waited for them to come. And then I called my mom and I left her a voicemail and said, hey, I'm having a stroke. I love you. I'll let you know, like those kinds of things, because
Mm-hmm.
I know that everybody worries about me,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't take that from them.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing is like, I just want everybody to know that I'm prepared for something happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
I can do all of the things in the world and something bad could happen to me. And I know that, and I'm okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
I've fully accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
I could be taking a shower tomorrow and my artery could rupture, one of my arteries could rupture and I could bleed out before I ever get to 911.
Mm-hmm.
Or they could take me to the hospital and try to do surgery on me and kill me faster. There's all sorts of possibilities that play into that. And I'm okay with it. Like, I've come to terms with it. My biggest fear is that other people haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want them to find me in a bathroom or in the kitchen, or
Mm-hmm.
someone's going to end up finding me dead or
Mm-hmm.
something, and they're going to think, oh my gosh, she was alone when she died.
Mm-hmm.
And be more sad that I wasn't surrounded by people I love when I die or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want people worrying about that because I'm completely okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
I've completely come to terms with it. So I've thought about doing videos for people.
Yeah.
That they can watch after I die.
Mm-hmm.
So that they're reminded, like, you can miss me, but don't feel bad for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm happy.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, and that's something that you will never be able to take away. But that's okay, because like you're so okay with it.
Yeah.
And it's so cool to see that, because I've never personally met someone who's so who they are and exactly who they are, and they're just like, this is me. Take it or leave it. This is who I am.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to be like that. How do I become so cool with who I am? I don't even know who I am. Like, and like, it's inspiring. And I'm sure that everyone who's listened to this podcast or seen your videos feels the same way, because you, Katie, are an inspiration to those around you.
Whether I like it or not.
Whether you like it or not. Because I've never seen anyone who moves as fast as you. And it blows my mind. And I'm always impressed that you do so much and that you are just you. And I love that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, let's circle back to the beginning.
Okay.
VEDS.
Yes.
Why is it a zebra?
Why is VEDS a zebra? So,
is it specifically VEDS that's a zebra, or is it all of Ehlers-Danlos that's a zebra?
all of Ehlers-Danlos is a zebra. So that came from a saying by some doctor for some medical book or teaching. It's a teaching point,
Okay.
I think, for many hospitals that are teaching, is that when you hear hoofbeats, you're looking for a horse, not a zebra. Because they don't want people to start immediately going to all of these rare causes for things.
But you're the zebra.
But you're the zebra.
Got it.
So they're looking for horses, which are like diabetes or high blood pressure, the more common things that everybody can potentially struggle with. And that's how Ehlers-Danlos gets missed, is that they're looking...
Like with you.
Yeah. They're looking for something really common. And so when you go to the doctor and you spend 5 minutes in the office with them, they're like, oh yeah, here's this medication for this, and you never see them again. And that's another part of the problem with Ehlers-Danlos is that so many different parts of your body are affected that by the time you get diagnosed, you've probably seen a multitude of doctors for different things. And nobody has taken a step back and looked at the whole picture. You know, why are you having chronic pain? Like, why were you diagnosed with fibromyalgia? Why do you pass out when you stand up? Wow, you've had a lot of joint injuries. Why is that? They don't really, there's not one doctor in the middle taking a step back and looking at all of that until you've had a whole lot of it.
Yeah.
And you just get put into this category of like hypochondriac or something, or people perceive you as that because there's no big picture diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so that's where the zebra.
Is it common for people with VEDS to sort of self-diagnose and then sort of push for it?
I don't think that's as common. I think that my story is a little bit different in that aspect. I know that there are other people that have done that, but most of what I've heard are people who didn't get diagnosed until they had a major emergency. So it could be like they go in with a stroke, or somebody went to go do an angiogram for Bridget.
Yep.
Who was the first person I talked to on the podcast show. She went in for an angiogram for carotid cavernous fistula, which is like I think it's a bulge in your carotid artery that is behind your eye. And I think that bulge starts to communicate with the vein improperly, and it causes a bunch of weird things to happen. But she was like in her early 20s, I think. And they're like, well, we'll just do this routine angiogram. We'll figure out what's going on in there, and we'll just fix it while we're there. No big deal. I don't even think they ever got to the fistula before everything else started rupturing from the angiogram.
Yeah.
So things like that usually happen before you're diagnosed, and then it's kind of too late because they've already opened you up, or they've already tried to do surgery on you, and now you've got all these other problems too that you didn't have before. And I think that's the more common.
How does stitches work? I was just thinking about that. Like, when you were talking about being opened up, like, how do you close your back if you've got the thin skin?
It can be a struggle, for sure. Most of my stitches don't stay in as long as they're supposed to, or they kind of, like, push out. My body just rejects them, I feel like. So a lot of times, I've had stitches a whole lot of times in my life, and most of the time I end up, especially recently, as I've gotten older, it's more common, I think, for them to start falling out too early. I'll get butterfly bandages and reinforce them from the outside because they don't do that great. But they are common for me because my skin is so thin that I tear easily. Like, I had a cat jump off my lap and gave me 15 stitches. So. Yeah.
And then you got a tattoo.
And then I got a tattoo of him hanging off of the scar.
Which is hilarious. But you've had issues with getting tattoos.
Yeah, I
with
had
your thin
one
skin.
With my Willis tattoo.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you specifically told him, right?
Yes.
That you have thin skin.
Yep.
And he was like, yeah, I got it.
I got it. No worries.
And then it started bleeding? Not like bleeding, but the ink.
The ink bled under the skin. It got into the fatty layer because he went too deep with the needle. And that was the only tattoo I've ever had a problem with, is the one that I warned them about beforehand. So I really just should have not warned him and seen what happened, I guess. But when I went back, like, the tattoo blew out, basically. So went too deep into the skin, and then the ink bled out underneath and caused this, like, big blue tint underneath my skin. And when I went back and said, I told you I had thin skin, he's like, but, usually only see blowouts with older people who have, like, really thin skin. I'm like, face palm. Like, what did I tell you?
You're like, I literally told you.
I literally told you.
Said it with my words that I have thin skin. And so, your Willis tattoo.
Yeah.
Who's Willis?
Willis is this little cartoon character that I started drawing last year when I was in the emergency room one day. Brought a sketchbook with me, and he is based off the diagram of the Circle of Willis, which is a view of the arteries in your brain, and they use it like it's just in the middle of your head. Like, if you were to cut the top of your skull off and look down, that's what you would see is like where all of those arteries are come together near the top. It's like the circle of Willis. And I remember seeing a picture of it, I think because I was looking at where my internal carotid artery was, because that's where I thought I had a problem in my neck, or I knew I had a problem at that point with an artery in there. But I wanted to know more about it. And I saw a little diagram, and I was like, man, that looks like a little person. So one day in the ER, I did a whole little sketch of it, and I drew him as with a little face and his own little pseudoaneurysm.
To match yours.
To match mine. His is in a different artery than mine for artistic reasons.
Liberties.
Yeah. But that's where Willis came from. So I have a little tattoo on my arm of Willis now. And, yeah.
I like it. I think all of your tattoos are great. Because, like, I didn't know with having the thin skin would affect that until you came back and had blowout in your tattoo. I had no idea. So let's see. What are some of the weirdest questions that you've gotten about VEDS?
So usually if you tell somebody what you have and they're like you usually can watch people put the dots together. You tell them about one thing and then you can say, well, wait, what does that mean for this? Or what does that mean for this? And so some of the weirdest questions I've got are those like they're trying to understand the condition fully. And so they're asking questions like, what about when you're constipated? Because they're asking about that strain. They're trying to think of times that they strain, I think. And so then they're asking you about those times. And so it's usually sex and constipation.
Those are the questions that you typically get.
Those are the questions that I typically get from somebody who's like, obviously not in a professional environment.
Yeah.
They're just like trying to piece it all together for what it means for my life.
Yeah. So on a final note, what would be your best advice for someone who's like going through this? Like what did you find that made you or helped you become so accepting and understanding VEDS?
That's a hard thing because there are a couple different things that made a big difference for me. The type of mind that I have is that I have to understand something as completely as I can in order to accept it. And so for me, it didn't truly raise my fear level all that much when I was reading about the different things that could happen. I certainly had moments right after diagnosis where I was just like, oh my gosh, this could happen and that's devastating, and this could happen and that's devastating. And it took a couple months to kind of really accept it for that. But the more I read about it, the more I try to understand it, the more comfortable I feel with it, because it's not like my arteries are going to actively explode. It's that the tissues themselves are not held together well. And so they're more likely to tear. On a very basic level, they're just more likely to bulge or tear and have issues. And so like once I can really understand that and understand the limitations of what I can do for risk management, then I just that's who I am, is that I accept it for what it is. So that was helpful, just getting more knowledge about it. Talking to other people who have this was also a major milestone for me. When I was first diagnosed and I was on the Ehlers-Danlos support forums, most of the people on there were dealing with joint dislocations and bowel issues and POTS. And those weren't things that I could really relate with too much. Chronic pain, like I had pain in my neck, but it wasn't like I have chronic joint pain for sure, muscle pain. Once I was added to the VEDS support group after I got my diagnosis, that was like this aha moment where suddenly this entire group of people were going through the same thing I was. or are family members of somebody who did or does. So that has been a blessing and a curse because I have a whole group of people that I can use for questions. I can use for support. I know that as soon as I meet these people, we know each other. There's no trying to really understand. It's just you just know that they've also coped with this diagnosis and know what it means for the most part. So that has been like truly a blessing to have these people in my life. But it is a bit of a curse because when you're so involved, you see when bad things happen. So doing the podcast and doing the YouTube channel and talking to people on Facebook, people reach out to me for support when they're trying to figure out what they have. They find my channel on YouTube or they find my blog or something and they use to contact me and I kind of talk them through it a little bit as I can. But it's hard. It definitely becomes hard and it can be very isolating in some ways because it's hard to get to a place of acceptance, I think, for a lot of people with it. And I guess I struggle with the fact that I have accepted it. So it can be kind of lonesome.
Yeah.
That can be very lonesome. And it can be very devastating when you see people pass away from this and you feel your community being totally rocked. Like the past few months, it's just been complete insanity.
Yeah.
It's like every time I turn around, it's like, do you stop telling people who don't have VEDS what happened?
Yeah.
And just pretend like it's not significant when it really is. It is significant because they're 19, they're 51, they're 39, they're 28. Like, it's just heartbreaking to see this stuff. So it's been a blessing and a curse, like being part of the community. But I think that overall, having that group of people that all know what you're going through and have been you have the same thing, that has been one of the best things that has come from this.
Yeah.
So.
And just bringing awareness to it. You're literally the biggest advocate I know for this. Like, you had us all wear red for VEDS. And I was like, I don't even know what this thing is, but if Katie wants me to do it, you got it. I didn't know what it was, but I was like, sure. I don't know how wearing red's going to help, but it starts the ball rolling.
Right.
The questions start being asked. And I think that's important because there's so many doctors that will just dismiss it, like in your case.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's so rare. There's no way.
There's no way.
There's no way you have this. And it's like, but what if I do?
Right.
but what if? What if I'm a zebra?
Yeah.
Treat me if I was a zebra, not a horse. I don't want to be a horse.
Look, I like stripes, okay?
But
I have stripes.
But, like, you go to conferences and you speak at them and you have your YouTube channel and you have this podcast and you are helping people find the questions to ask and knowing the questions to ask. And I think that's so important because without you, I feel like a lot of people in our circle especially, and I'm sure in other people's circles, have been able to figure out what this is and then is now know and can now share that knowledge with other people because it's so rare and people just don't talk about it. And I think that's awesome. And you're awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're looking at me like, oh, I've got 10 heads, but I'm just gonna humble brag on you for a minute, so that's fine.
I get really awkward about that.
About praise and comfort. I mean, not comfort, compliments.
Yeah.
But
I appreciate it.
You really deserve it. Like, I'm sure that every single person that listens to this podcast or watches your YouTube channel is appreciative of you starting these conversations, even though they're hard to talk about, and having a place where people feel safe to come and talk about it. because, like you said, it's so isolating, and feeling alone in this crazy condition is probably terrifying.
Yeah.
But then finding someone like you, who is you, and you're just like, whoa, let's go! And you just go. And then they're like, oh, maybe I don't have to be afraid to like live my life like this.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And you should be proud of everything that you've done. And I'm glad that you let me interview you so that people could also hear how awesome you are.
Thank you.
Because you are. And I don't know how to end this.
Well, I'll go ahead and end it.
I don't know how you normally end it, but I think if there's anything else you want to add that you think is important, I think we touched on a majority of who you are and kind of your story.
Yeah, I think some of it's probably a little bit like here and there, like mixed, but I think we touched on the major points.
Yeah.
So,
and if you like this, we'll do another one.
We'll do another one. Yeah, if you have follow-up questions, maybe in a couple months I'll do an extra
Send them to
episode.
Me. Send them to me and I'll ask them.
All right. Thank you for doing this. And thank you everybody for listening. This is Staying Connected. And this was a bit of my story with VEDS. So if you want to follow me on YouTube, if you found this podcast not through my YouTube channel, you can go search for me on YouTube as Translucent1, and you should find me. I'll put a link to it in the description of this podcast episode. Go ahead and go back and listen to the other podcast episodes where I talk to other people about their story with VEDS. Some of the stories on here, all of the stories on here are absolutely incredible. Some of them are heartbreaking, for sure. All of them are heartbreaking a little bit, but it's been incredible to be able to talk to these wonderful people who have this and hear their stories. So this podcast is normally for other people to share their stories with VEDS. This is a special episode where I share mine. Go ahead and subscribe to it, and new episodes are coming out on the last Sunday of every month. So keep on the lookout, and I'll talk to you soon.